My name is Susan Knowles. I'm actually about to enter my 20th year of homeschooling after having taught in Lutheran schools a bit as well. I went to Concordia, Bronxville for my undergraduate Lutheran teacher diploma, taught in a couple of different states, kind of ended up moving around a lot, and that was one of our biggest reasons to start homeschooling. And so in the course of that, I've had a lot of experiences, both in moving from a progressive educational mindset to classical, and also just even getting comfortable with the idea of homeschooling, and then continuing. A lot of times to my surprise. So it's been an interesting journey, and I think it really has given me a sense of a number of things that people get used to, and people being on a journey, the idea of come further up, come further in. When I heard about that as the theme for our conference, I thought that absolutely describes my journey toward homeschooling, but especially toward classical education, and finding out that I was actually coming home was pretty exciting. So I had taught in some Lutheran schools where actually my educational background hadn't prepared me to run into things like diagramming sentences. There were still some remnants of Latin and different things in different schools where I was teaching, and so I was encountering remnants, I think, from a previous time, and focuses on memory. I had grown up in a public school, K-12, so the whole experience was new to me. Then as a homeschooler, I started to encounter some classical programs like from Veritas Press, from Memoria Press. I tried Tapestry of Grace for a year, Classical Conversations. I wasn't able to participate in a program, but I was able to investigate and look into actually starting one. So I was able to get familiar with a lot of other things. And then through Dr. Veith's blog, I actually realized that I was coming home to Lutherans as I moved toward more classical. So my oldest child experienced a lot of progressive education first, and then attempts at transition that were imperfect and halting, and so she came out with an entirely different mixture, and my youngest is still 8, so that's a 15-year gap. He's getting an entirely different education than she did. So I continue to be learning as I go along. I had existing homeschooling connections when I became connected with a church that had a school, and the school was really struggling. And so they asked if there were any ways that we might be able to help the school. And I had all of these connections, and I knew if they offered some classes that people would join us. So we actually it was kind of a rural school, so it was a little bit of a surprise what a response we ended up with from the beginning. But we just started offering some basic things that the school wanted that we could fund. And we also offered some like part-time, like they could enroll for 1 class or 2 classes or things like that. Our middle school science class, I think in the entire middle school at that point, there were about 13 kids, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And so we suddenly had a class of 24 after, just maybe, I think we had advertised maybe 4 weeks prior. So we had a lot of good responses from the homeschooling community, and continued to add electives, continued to try different formats that would benefit the schools. So we added like a Friday afternoon program that was an incentive. So we would bring in electives like gymnastics or recorder, musical things. We brought in drama. We brought in a lot of things that they could sign up for electives on the Friday afternoon, and it was dependent on them having their work completed. And if they didn't have their work completed, then the teachers got extra time with those students while the other ones got some enrichment opportunities. So that was kind of a favorite approach for a while. Then we switched again and started offering more. I think they didn't have a gym teacher at that point, so we started offering a gym teacher. They didn't have art, and so we brought in an art teacher. And so again, we were doing a lot of combined classes. They preferred some of the daytime things, but there are all kinds of afternoon enrichment things we could do as well. So eventually we did add like chess club, Shakespeare club, and some other options along the way. We also, as instructors, we had people from all over. It was retired teachers from public school and Lutheran schools who helped us work on the program, as well as people who didn't really have teaching experience but had an area of expertise. Our approach was very, we were really trying to help the school, and the school was not classical. So when we were able to add classical elements, like we were able to add Latin, and they were able to use that as their foreign language, and they were grateful for it. They were small, and at the same time, obviously we were moving in some classical elements as well, but consistently trying to make sure that we were targeting their interests as well as ours, so that it was mutually beneficial. If at any point the school was hesitant about something that we were trying to do, we would talk about it. If we had interactions with behavior issues on either side, we stayed in communication. We had a kind of a co-leader position, kind of, so that there was someone from the school, and then I would help from the homeschool side. And I think probably the most critical thing we did was make sure that we had a really good feedback loop. Not only would we put out forms and ask the questions that we wanted to do, we certainly had goals in the program. And so there were times that people came in looking for something we weren't doing, and we were fine with that. But we would ask for feedback both on those forms, and I would go and get it. That's one of my biggest things that I think really helped the program, because people then had ownership in what we were doing. They had a chance to share their feedback, not just with each other, but with me. And they felt like they had an influence on where we were going and how we were honing and improving what we did. So that way, when they talked to someone else, it tended to be positive word of mouth feedback. So it really helped things to grow, but it also helped us be honest about what level of instruction we were and weren't providing. We actually, especially at the beginning, did that on a weekly basis. So we would make sure that if something wasn't going well in a class, it would give us a chance to improve it right away and make sure that the experience of both the people coming in and the people already in the school were benefiting. We eventually added high school classes, which this was just a K-8 school. So we added classes that went beyond that, and also added those classes for the sake of adults in the congregation. So that was where we started to see an overlap where the people participating in those classes weren't from the school. It was actually homeschoolers and adults, either from the congregation or from the community. So we had some nice art instruction for a while that was both high schoolers and members of the congregation, and also PE. We added some fitness classes and things like that. So everything that we did not have classical elements in it, but it allowed kind of an invitation towards some of the things that expressed goodness and truth and beauty more closely. So any homeschooler could participate in some of those things, but some of those would really draw them deeper. And so our approach was gentle. It was very respectful. It was very careful about the relationships involved, and we didn't try to force transition in any way. And the result was that we really were able to add in some nice things. We added in readings from the omnibus curriculum from Veritas at the upper levels. We had several years of Greek instruction for high school. It ended up being mostly high school boys, although we invited adults to that one. We had some Hebrew instruction for a while. It was nice. Ours was more of an a la carte option, so people really could just choose one thing. And it was neat to see how the community was able to be engaged in it as well. And so that's where my hope is kind of that as we go through this session today, we can actually talk about things that would give you ideas, that maybe structures that you hadn't thought about. Because over time, we just continued to find different ways of meeting needs. And sometimes an instructor would be there for a while and then disappear, and suddenly that becomes a weak spot. So we stayed committed to doing what we could do well. And the flexibility really helped us to build the program. And we were even able to add flexibility with things like music lessons, which again could happen whether or not there was a school, but was benefited by having a school because you could build more group instrumental things, which would be attractive to homeschoolers, choral things, and we really saw it a lot of times as kind of a classical evangelism. I know there's a reference on one of the pages on the CCLE page that are the marks of a school, I think it is, that it talks about, we are their introduction to classical education a lot of times, and this program allowed us to introduce those elements and find out. People would sign up for them first because they saw the value of the class, and then we would talk about the classical elements involved in it. So it was able to grow from them seeing the value in it first. We eventually, the school, it was already small and struggling, and it eventually shrank down just to the pre-K. So while we were able to help it last longer and have good options toward the end, we were not able to actually help it rebuild. But then what happened was it transitioned into a program primarily for homeschoolers and the church. And so again, now we had sort of a different format that would allow us to try more things. So I think we added more sciences actually at that point because the school had been doing them before. So science enrichment in the afternoons and more of history and literature units, readers theater, a lot of those things. And again, what format you choose to do them in, whether it's 1 day or 2 day, whether it's an end of the week enrichment and after school, so many options about how that could fit into a schedule that would meet so many needs. We eventually went through a couple of transitions. So I was administrating for a while, but then I went to get my master's degree and wanted to just teach because I'd been administrating all this time. So we actually had a couple of different new administrators. Our current administrators have actually transitioned the program again to a program that still has those a la carte options in the afternoon, and in the morning has a classical Lutheran core for grades K to 12. So we have, again, we're still doing that omnibus curriculum. We've got years of doing that at this point. We're working through Shirley English at the lower grades. We have Memoria for the writing program at the upper grades. Like, we found mixtures of things that work well. The advantage that we have over a school is that we don't have to provide everything they need, so we can provide what we do well. And they can fill the gap, and we're just very honest about what we do. What we do give to them. So we also have recitation and memory and handwriting. So it was interesting when the handwriting was offered in the afternoon for the first time, how many people signed up for it, considering, again, we could see that while there are broadly in the culture that's not being respected, actually there were people flocking to that class. So I think people notice the value in things without necessarily starting with the labels. In Eternal Treasures, if you haven't seen this book, there are a lot of really useful things in here that can help you understand the different situations, because every homeschooling situation is very unique. Some are near schools, some are nowhere near schools, some are nowhere near any resources. Chapter 5 in here talks about the Christian education heritage we have in the Lutheran Church. And so as you're talking about reaching out to homeschoolers, trying to get people familiar with what their needs would be, and especially establishing or sometimes remembering that parents are responsible for their children's education, and we want to support them with whatever choices that they're making. We want to support them well as a church. And so if they have a school to go to and that's working great. I know, like for Cheryl, she had kids whose needs couldn't be met by any school. So homeschooling was a good fit for her, and it was something that her church was able to support her in. And so she's got stories of that in here as well as in her other book. And there are people who, for whatever reason, are also at public schools, and great Lutherans who are teachers there. So finding a way to make sure that you're showing value for all of those ways in which the church can be supporting parents without trying to micromanage their decisions. I guess that's one thing that seemed really important for our program, because even we had public school parents who were helping us with some of these options. We currently have people whose children are in a Lutheran school but are helping with the after-school part of this. We really have a lovely, respectful blend of people who are looking out for each other's interests and trying to work together for a really good outcome for everybody. So I've talked about some of the options in program structure and there were reasons along the way that we chose or didn't choose different things. Co-ops right away, my first experiences as a homeschooler with a co-op was that you just don't know who's in charge necessarily, and that can shift quickly. And the way that they run the program, in my world, there weren't a lot of Lutherans around, so a lot of times it was legalistic. Also, co-ops tend, just in general, to have lifespans. So you could have your congregation host a co-op, but these are just some of the things to stay aware of, and you might be able to shore up some of the weaknesses and take advantage of the strengths. If you're not familiar with a co-op situation, typically all the parents have to do something, whether it be teach or be an assistant or something in the classes. And so it can have really good strengths in that way, that people are present and engaged, but at the same time, you don't necessarily control the content that is being done by the co-op. It's pretty much what you can find a willing teacher for, and because you have to fill those time slots, like the students, in our program, the students were always in there by choice. That was part of the reason we designed it the way we did, where in the co-op, okay, all the 7th graders, unless you have lots of options, all the 7th graders are doing this option whether they like it or not, and suddenly you end up with a totally different dynamic than we did. When we did really hard classes in our a la carte format, people were there because either they were really committed to it or their parents were really committed to it. And so we could ask things of them. We could ask hard things, we could assign homework and anticipate it being done, and that kind of thing. In a co-op, my experiences were that you really couldn't expect things to come back completed necessarily, and it's really hard to follow through on that. And there are exceptions, but it's a trickier format. So it's not my favorite. But although I'm not sure, I've never seen a co-op run by Lutherans with a Lutheran, kind of a Lutheran school approach. The biggest thing that chased me from the co-op really was just wanting to provide an environment that is law and gospel with the gospel predominant. And so that to me was the biggest factor. And so whether it's a church offering programs or a school or just homeschoolers or offering something to the community, that was the primary thread throughout it that held things together, was that the people who interacted with our program should, number one, understand the gospel. The way that we interact with them should reflect what we believe, just the way it does in a Lutheran school, or the way we hope it does in a Lutheran school, right? So there are Classical Conversations is a group that actually is specifically to homeschoolers. We got very close to running a Classical Conversations group at our church, and their materials are high quality. They're really well done, and there were so many benefits to it. So we really did almost run it. The thing that stopped us actually was that we had actually come up with a staff of Lutherans who were able to start the program as teachers, but the person that we had chosen who said she would only do elementary school was not a current homeschooler with a person in that age range. And so they said we couldn't. So it really kind of stopped us in our tracks, because then we thought, boy, we operate under a board of education. We approve our teachers, in more of a way that a school does rather than the way that Classical Conversations typically did. And so when we went to try to staff it with people who would reflect exactly what we were trying to do, it was certainly open to everybody, but we wanted to start on a really good footing. We realized that elementary slot it's by design, it always has to be occupied by a person who has children in those age ranges. And so if you have someone who's Lutheran who has children in those age ranges, you're fine. But that particular spot always has to have that requirement. And the upper level classes, which we had some people with, younger children who could have done that, but their strengths were for older kids. They wanted to do debate. They wanted to do the higher level thinking things. Little kids were not their thing. So we didn't have flexibility in that format to move forward. And it kind of just made us stop and think, and also to realize our goal has always been to try and actually, we hope that someday this will actually bring a school to our area, a classical school. We don't have any classical schools in our area at this point. And Classical Conversations is not designed to transition to that. So I love all of their materials, and if you're really just trying to focus on that, it can be a great program. Like the way they have weaved them together is just beautiful. But yeah, for us as thinking broader as far as building something that would potentially be able to serve more than just homeschoolers, we kind of realized that was probably not the direction that we could go. We also, I know there are some other options as far as like Veritas Press and Memoria Press. They have some groups that you can form from them. Again, having done all of the things that we've done now, I kind of love the idea of just doing your own thing, putting it together. It requires more knowledge. Like it's easier. Classical Conversations teaches you to do everything. It equips you for everything you're going to do. So it's kind of a brilliant system. You're kind of on your own if you try it the way that we've done it. But and if you have a school to build from that's already classical, like you're in a world I haven't seen. So so that's wonderful. Some of the other things that you can do are so simple. So even if you're coming just from a church and you don't have any other educational opportunities going on right now, offering music lessons, helping the arts start to become more valued for your congregation can be a really big thing. Weekly chapels, you could start offering those for homeschoolers. Lending libraries. After school enrichment could meet multiple needs for a church, but again, you can put classical elements into that. You know, like I said, we tended to do chess club, Shakespeare club, readings. A lot of things are attractive to people, even if they are not familiar with classical. We also would do standardized testing site. In our state, we have to test as homeschoolers, so that was one thing we did. You can also organize field trips on site or off. So several times we hosted, there's a local planetarium, they'll come and bring it to you. So the Lutheran school hosted that, but invited homeschoolers to come as well. And so we just gave them another group as a rotation. Another time, the homeschoolers came alongside a field trip they had planned or an in-house event where the weather, the local meteorologist on television was going to come out and do a presentation, and all the homeschoolers did science projects that were hands-on so that everybody could participate in them. And so we kind of created a field trip in-house by another cooperative opportunity like that. There are also a lot of opportunities with online classes now. Some schools are offering those online classes themselves. We have not managed to take advantage of that too much yet. That's one thing I'm kind of hoping for this year, is that our discussion class will have a little bit of an outside element. Our current classical Lutheran core is designed in a university model style, which is another thing we investigated. The National Association of University Model Schools actually establishes schools that's almost like a blend of homeschoolers and school. So at an elementary level, they'll come to school on 2 days, and the other 3 days, their parents are reinforcing that work at home or teaching the lessons at home. So for example, if you've used Shirley English, there are 5 lessons in a week. That's what we're doing right now in our 2-day program. We do 2 days worth of the lessons. They do the other lessons at home, and then you decide, do they do the testing with you? Do they do the testing at home? Again, in our program, it's relaxed, so we can kind of decide that. But if you were running an actual school, obviously, you might want to do the testing part. So that's just one example there. And then for the high school levels, usually they would have 3 days of class and 2 days at home. They would be able to, from that, use a school building for all the ages. So the elementary kids come, say, Tuesday, Thursday, and the high school kids come Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And they're running a school, but nobody's there 5 days a week. And then they can also have extracurricular activities. I know in southern states those are more common, but it's NAUMS is Naums, And if you look that up, you'll find their things. So they have a specific branded way of helping people start a school, and like step by step, they have an 18-month plan of how to start from zero to having a running school with active supporters and everything, how to evaluate along the way, your practices, what benchmarks you're looking for, that kind of thing. Really, again, another brilliant program. A lot of evangelical classical schools that I know of are using that. I'm not sure if any Lutheran schools have done that yet, but it is another really neat model, and it lets you have cooperation with the parents and the school again, which has different challenges, but there are some really great benefits. We also, it's possible to have sort of a on-site support for online classes. So say you had kids sign up for Wittenberg Academy classes, or really anywhere. I mean, they could sign up for some of the Concordia, Wisconsin classes for dual enrollment. But if you knew several kids are doing the same thing, you could provide on-site support that would assist them outside of their coursework, whether you call it tutoring or whether you call it a study session or different things like that. Those are the kind of things that could eventually develop into, again, I'm always thinking, how do we develop new Lutheran schools? So sometimes some of those options could help provide things that you don't have if you're trying to build toward that program. Or a church who doesn't have anything could, again, use that as an option to provide some more robust things along the way. We also, in our school website, stpeternorthridge.org. I'll give you some of these afterwards. If somebody wants to email, if you want to email me, I'll send you a lot of these links if you want them. We have some samples there. You can see one. We actually have an online class registration system. We have, and again, we developed that over time. You can see some of how we differentiate between the different options that we have. Also, there's a good chapter again in Eternal Treasures. Chapter 6 talks a lot about cooperative things, and there are some samples in there of some other schools that have tried different means of working together with home and school and church. So that's another good resource. And I think as you go to approach this, the Christian freedom of the parent, supporting the parent in their role as parent, and looking out for the interests of everybody involved are the key things that really made this, the things that we have tried, work. There were times that I was really impatient and wanted something that looked much more like the classical ideal I was starting to develop in my mind. I would have loved to push things faster. But it's interesting because I was thinking back about this the other day and thinking, I'm not sure we'd be where we are right now if I had tried to do it in my timing. God does it in his timing, and I think being gentle about it and helping people to see the value of it before we pushed towards something, or just offering it freely, like with the Latin. I don't think they were looking for Latin, but we had a teacher who was homeschooling, and she had 5 years of Latin on her own, and she wasn't even Lutheran, but she just wanted her daughter to have Latin instruction with other kids, because that way she could interact with other people. And so that was the start of our Latin program. So it was just a gift to our Lutheran school at that point. So I think when you can do it in a way that is really a gift, it can really be seen well by all. The 1 or 2 day options, what curriculum choices you make are kind of critical to whether that works. Like I mentioned, Shirley English, and as long as they have the teacher manual, they can do the other days without too much problem. It's so scripted, just if they can just do it, it's great. I'm teaching the 7th to 12th grade omnibus, and so this historical literature, it's a little different for the parents to support. We still would like them to have the teacher manual, but then you've got, even as I'm teaching it, I'm obviously giving it a Lutheran flavor, and some of the assignments, like I would pick and choose among them, that kind of thing. So it's just not, it doesn't work the same as the Shirley English, but so far the parents actually have read along with us on a lot of the books. So we end up having these lovely conversations. And so I think Memoria Press is probably one of our favorites for that kind of, if you're going to do classes where you only have them 1 or 2 times a week and then you send them home, their material tends to be structured in a way that would help you keep track of it and assist with that, where some of the other curriculums we've tried, it just seems almost impossible to get them to come with their work done. Somehow it has to seem manageable. Somehow there has to be some accountability. Your ability to, like for us, again, the a la carte option is a real safety net, because people, hopefully they're signing up knowing what the workload's going to be and prepared to make sure their child does it. And of course that's not perfect, but you have to have some kind of a boundary around that if you're in this class, you're going to, you're going to in some way do the work that's going to help you keep up. I had the flexibility this year where we had one parent sign up, and she actually had her daughter doing a Becca English at home, and then she had also signed up for the Shirley English with us. And so it took a little while to realize, as she was coming without assignments, what was going on. But at that point, she was the only child in her grade level, so I said, do you want me to just teach her? She's doing great with the jingles. She's learning lots of things that Becca doesn't do, but we turned it into an enrichment class for her instead of her basic, because she wanted to keep doing a Becca, and it turned out great. Where the other kids that were in the same class in 2nd grade, they were able to do the entire thing. And even with that, I think those 2 particular students were able to do that well. I think being flexible with homeschoolers and realizing their background and their ability, trying to make sure you're meeting the actual students' needs over your ideas of what the curriculum should accomplish. I think we want to guard not enough rigor that drives the joy out, and vice versa. It should be something that's drawing them in, but part of it is that challenge, so it's got to be challenging or they won't enjoy it either. So trying to watch those with the individuals that we have come in. And again, our program's small enough to do that. If you have a bigger program, those kind of things could be more difficult. We've also had behavior issues come in and tended to try to just add adult resources for them. Help them function in the classes that we have, and add an adult who can help coach them and hopefully get them into a place where they can actually participate better. So especially as we were first doing the homeschool and day school combined classes, we really wanted to make sure that the learning environment worked well, and you had a lot of diversity walking into the room. So we did increase the adult ratios right away and make sure that the teachers knew if they were having trouble, they would get support. They wouldn't be expected to change their instruction to do that. There are some great resources. I know I haven't moved this for you at all. There are some great resources on the CCLE website that help understand what the characteristics are of a Lutheran school. And so in my looking at that, I just look through, so many of them adapt really well for a homeschool program. They just might have a little more grace involved. But I think it's really important that, it's been really important to me to try to have a program that expresses, that Lutheran theology is at the core, that the law gospel environment, especially for some of these kids, it's been the first time that someone has reminded them that God forgives them for how they just acted in their class, or some of the first times. So even though these families are Christians and they go to other churches, we're getting a chance to actually share really good law and gospel theology with them while we interact with their children. So to me, that's been one of the biggest blessings. There's also, Pastor Kieser has an interview on Lutheran education and baptism that he did on Issues, Etc. So if you were trying to picture what is unique about this environment that you were doing, I think that interview is a great place to go. So if you search on Issues, Etc. for Lutheran education and baptism, Pastor Stephen Kieser, and again, if you email me, I'll get you that link. But I really enjoyed listening through that, and I was like, this is really expressing what we're trying to do with kids. That is unique. Cheryl Swope's Simply Classical book is another one that I really like. I don't think it's not all about special needs. It's about like the way that she approaches the classical education elements in here are so beautiful and merciful. I think we have kids of all ability levels come in. Some of them don't necessarily have special needs, but they if we tried to set certain standards at first, they would be turned away and lose all joy of learning. Where her book just beautifully approaches some of that. And she also has a great resource section at the end that has recommendations for people who are trying to learn more about either classical education or Lutheran expression of it, or particular curriculum that can work well. So I guess even if you're not interacting with a special needs population, I highly recommend her book, and in particular on this one, her chapter 4, What is Classical Education and What is a Classical Christian Education? She does a great job of differentiating there. It's another place that might express some of the differences if you're trying to explain to people either why you're trying to reach out and grow a classical program, or why you're trying to reach homeschoolers. You know, some of the things that she has to say in here speak really well. Also, the Eternal Treasures book has Our Christian Faith, the Word for Us, in chapter 4. That's another good place to go to talk about what would a Lutheran homeschool program look like. There's a handout on the CCLE website for Walther's Theses on Law and Gospel. That's a really nice resource. It's been used for workshops at this convention before. Also, there's a book by CPH called God at Work, Changing Lives by Teaching Law and Gospel. That one has kind of bite-size law and gospel, you know, it kind of walks through, like if you were able to either walk through it with your teaching faculty, or, you know, maybe just with your administrator, or have people do it on a devotional basis, it does a really nice job of applying that to children. Also, Ambassadors of Reconciliation has some really nice resources on their website as well. They have an online class that you could actually ask people to take on an individual basis. So the thing that I thought would be neat about that is that they could spend their time getting the basic teaching through that online class, and then you could apply it to, okay, so this is how that applies to children. Here's how we, you know, as we're applying law, remember the gospel. How do you keep the gospel abundant in how you interact with children? So while that's a conflict-focused resource, I think as whether it be for administrators or for the teachers, that's another thing that we made a commitment to our teachers to do, was that if they were having trouble in the classroom, they wouldn't be alone in it. You know, we would come and back it up, and so we would help the children, you know, recognize where they were wrong, admit where they were wrong, ask for forgiveness, be reminded of God's forgiveness, those kind of things, restore the relationships along the way in a way that, you know, really represented our faith well. And there's another article on there, Classical Lutheran Education Defined, that talks about some of the ways that Luther talked about these kinds of issues in a school. Teach them, first of all, the 10 Commandments, the Creed, the Lord's Prayer, presenting them the same words of the text so that those who can repeat them after you and retain them in memory. You know, talking about helping them be familiar with the elements of the faith as a priority in their education. And then, in all things, let scriptures be the chief and most frequently used reading book, both in primary and high schools, and the very young should be kept in the Gospels. So there are more resources on the CCLE website as well, but I think it's easy to jump in with homeschoolers and just try to do something, but the backbone of your program is our theology, and it's what makes the rest of this beautiful. So taking the time to slow down and make sure that we're doing that. Some classical programs that people interact with can tend to be rigid or legalistic or even prideful, right? And so, like, being aware of that and trying not to be that with them as well. Look at this with humility. Realize that we're not going to ever have a perfect program, therefore we can do a a good program, and we can love the people who come in the door, and we can pursue truth and goodness and beauty in humility together, is really important. So as you're trying to support instructors, the same things become important. And again, we've had Lutherans and non-Lutherans in our program. Like I said, the Latin teacher who came in and blessed us with a good jump start was not Lutheran. So we've had to evaluate those kind of things along the way and try to, kind of come up with our own criteria about where it's okay to have a non-Lutheran teaching, where it's really important to have a Lutheran teaching, especially as you get to the upper grades where you're putting things together. I think especially there, having theological training, ideally maybe a pastor or someone, leading those classes can be really great. But I know we have a layperson also who's actually really good at that kind of thing. But just watching for the value of those people who can have conversations about all kinds of different things, but keep the theology central and sift through the way kids think in a way that is respectful and gentle, but consistent with our theology. There's as far as trying to make sure that the instructors are following methodology that is classical. Dr. Christopher Perrin has a Principles of Classical Pedagogy. His introductory lesson is free online on their site, and it's at classicalu.com. That has 8 essential principles of classical pedagogy. He talks about, making haste slowly, do much, not many. Repetition is the mother of memory. There's a whole bunch of nice principles in there that if you're trying to communicate to someone who's never taught classically before what classically looks like, that could be a really good resource for them to start picturing, and I think immediately they can start to see the value of that in their instruction. Also, the handbook for classical Lutheran education could be something that would be really helpful for them to read. I guess for me, I'm always looking for bite-sized thing, because in the kind of program we've run, that people are not going to invest volumes of time. They're not going to read heavy theological works. Trying to figure out what can you do to actually equip them that they will actually use. Make it bite-sized, make it attractive. So we've also, like I said before, we've had homeschoolers offer classes, we've had non-homeschoolers offer classes. It's been a beautiful mixture. Everybody is in a process of growth. So if someone's willing to learn something, you can teach them. Or you can give them resources that they will pursue, just the way we're all doing as we go along. Also, we could bring in speakers. I know on the, kind of throwing Cheryl out there, but on the homeschool, Classical Lutheran Homeschool Facebook page, Cheryl had just posted recently that if somebody was trying to bring in speakers, that they would help. And so I think that's another thing to keep in mind, is that there are resources around us, but they could be brought into our area to help train our teachers or educate our parent populations and that kind of thing too. And Simply Classical also talks about some curricular keys to classical education that could be helpful to someone who's trying to even evaluate curriculum. Kathy Duffy Reviews also reviews a lot of homeschool curriculum, so it's kathyduffyreviews.com. And she often will say, this one's really instructor intensive. She'll have a rating, or this one's, pretty, a student can work through this pretty independently. More independently might work well for a 1-day-a-week program or a 2-day-a-week program, where the teacher intensive ones probably won't work in a home program with homeschoolers if you're just hosting it 1 day a week. Although surely English might be on that list, and we've found a way to use it. So just being aware that how the program is structured really can impact whether a particular curriculum will help you. We also, Luther, when he was talking at the time of Reformation about how to differentiate between classes, he wasn't talking about grade levels, but he was saying like non-readers, readers, and then more of a logic, when they're ready for logic and rhetoric, were kind of the breakdown that he made. I think with homeschoolers that can be important. They, because they're not in a school that's saying we're going to read in this grade level or whatever, we've had kids who were younger, who are super young, who are readers. We've had kids who are older. So we've had a lot of flexibility about where we let them sign up based on where their strengths are, as much as the schedule will allow. So I think that's a good differentiation to keep in mind as well. And even as we were trying to do Shirley English, we realized this year that the youngest of the students, if they sign up for Shirley English but they're not reading yet, we're kind of in trouble. So yeah, so just keeping that kind of thing in mind. And there are some unique things serving homeschoolers. They tend to excel generally in independent learning, but they're used to whatever they're used to. So if you're challenging them with something they're not used to, they may need some extra support to realize that they actually can. They're used to having lots of choices in what they do at any given moment of any day a lot of times. They're also used to potentially just, if they have a thought, speaking it. So those are things that, we've tried to keep in mind in our program, that we just need to coach them. Usually if you're in a school, you're doing that coaching at a younger level, but with homeschoolers, you might be doing it at an older level. And yeah, it's not a shocker, and they do generally figure it out. Lining up, getting in lines is a real challenge. Some silly kind of practical things, being quiet in hallways, not running, a lot of things like that. So if you're interacting in a program like that, just anticipating that you probably have to give them a little bit of an intro to sort of group standards in that kind of thing. And depending on how frequently you do your classes, that can impact how far your reach is for homeschoolers. So if you're reaching to people who live a great distance away, a 1-day-a-week program is probably more appealing to them than a 2-day. We actually have a number of families, even with the 2-day format, who are traveling about an hour to come. But we've had families for years who've traveled an hour just for the 1-day-a-week program. So if you increase the number of days, you could, not have as wide a reach, which if you're in a city may be no big deal. But, again, we're out in the country and people would come and find us. So it was nice to have them do that. We also there are more articles on the CCLE website as far as administering a homeschool program. The marks of classical and Lutheran schools, sections 1 and 3, I thought were particularly helpful toward administration for a homeschool program. And the educator marks for excellence, part 3, is also really helpful. I also thought, again, Ambassadors of Reconciliation has a section on their website that says articles, and they have just a few articles down. There's a set of 3 that are articles on supervision in Christian ministry. So we've had issues with instructors along the way, especially sometimes, boy, they came highly recommended and then, this isn't working, or they're not good with parents, or they're, kinds of things. And we only have them for maybe 1 or 2 classes, so we need to figure this out quickly or it's not gonna work, and it reflects very poorly on our program. They have some nice things in there that just talk about, so if you go to address something, if this is a person who recognizes what they've done and they're repentant, then wow, you might have a really good learner and it's worth investing in. But if you have somebody who just blatantly won't, so kind of a way to, again, we're interacting with law and gospel with the people that we're supervising in ministry as well. So I thought that was a really helpful resource. As far as administration, again, I think my husband was in the Army, and so they do after action reports. They call them AARs. We did them routinely, after every time we held a set of classes, we did them at the beginning, and then we still did them frequently after. It just was such a great way to get feedback, tweak things before they actually became an issue. And then also, we had our instructors. It was interesting, one of our first instructors was a retired Lutheran school principal whose passion was science. And he had not taught for a number of years. He'd had complications from diabetes, so he hadn't had the chance to teach, but he got so energized at the idea of teaching homeschoolers. And his science classes were just So much fun. And he had, like, his basement was full of these totes that he had collected all these years, and they weren't being used. And so he brought them out and just did some amazing things with the kids. And I remember some of my favorite memories, though, outside of those classes, was that he would then go find the place where the parents are waiting. And then he would just start talking to them about God and creation and how all of these, all of these things lead back to God, and talking in detail about what we were learning. He would get the parents all energized and excited about what the kids were learning in their classes. And we had other retired Lutheran teachers as well, that it was so great to see them having a chance to put their skills to work in a no pressure environment. We've guaranteed that if there are any problems come up, we're right there to help them. And so we freed them to just enjoy teaching in a way that they probably hadn't been able to do in a long time. So I don't know if I can express how much fun some of that was to watch, and that there are resources all around you. A lot of them just surprised me. We'd have a casual conversation. The next thing we know, we have instruction going on. We had one art instructor who was traveling 2 hours to come teach art classes because she was so excited about the chance to teach art. And then the next thing you know, she's bringing her mother, who tutors Russian. And so, so for a little while, we had Greek and Hebrew and Russian and Latin going on all in the same place. So really some neat opportunities that can come if you can be creative about what you have to offer. And so,
do you take questions?
I was going to say, I think we're probably out of time for questions if you'd like. Yes.
Quick question on the last point you brought up, integrating other teachers from areas that you're actually in. Can you comment on any experience you have had by utilizing, people of expertise from members of a congregation? I'm just going to assume a Lutheran congregation, and then bringing them in and what that has looked like, training them, and then observing them in the classroom. How successful has that been if you've had that experience?
Yeah, I think especially from the congregation, that's been successful. If they were interested in teaching almost anything, we supported them. If it had classical applications, obviously, we would try to support that more. But especially just the love of learning, typically even things that they wanted to do would have some element of beauty in it, something that we could encourage. We would go through, I would go through a very specific process that I thought set it up for success. I would make sure that we had a very detailed course description of what they thought they were going to do, because the biggest sabotage to this is expectations that don't match what you're trying to offer. So I would help them kind of go through that process of making sure that this class was teaching exactly what they wanted to teach, and then would kind of say kids will either sign up or not sign up. In our kind of program, that's the way that worked. I found they would get very excited about that opportunity. And we also were pretty flexible about, we would give people a chance to do it as a volunteer to support the program. So even in the first days as we were doing it for the school or for the other program, a lot of the people from our congregation who did those kind of things would say, I just want to volunteer my time. And especially if you were making their instructional time pleasant, they were excited about it. So it's kind of income supporting the program at the same time as it is them really getting a chance to use the gifts they have. Is that?
Yeah, that does help. Are you still open to a possible series of questions?
Absolutely. Yep. That's the thing. Yep.
So you use that language, but yeah. All right. So you have the teachers that come in. Subject matter expertise is what we call them for those individuals. How do you, over time, then, say you get a new person come in, how do you evaluate them from an administrative point of view, that they're not only teaching what they should, but also teaching classically? As I assume you've already had that conversation with them, and they might say, yeah, I know classical.
Right.
I got the ruler for Latin class, but how would you then evaluate them?
Right.
And then what those discussions look like?
Yeah, well, and that's where I think the course description is really important. If you can have course descriptions that already demonstrate the classical elements that you're trying to have them meet, and then as you either do parent feedback or you have feedback for them, You can talk about if some of those are missing. Sometimes, so especially if the parents in the classes have those ideas, their feedback is my best tool. If the parents in there aren't looking for those elements, then I need to look a little differently. But like I said before, we really tried to ask feedback questions that would ask about those specific things. So if I was going to try a more structured program than where we started, I would probably take some of those benchmarks of what classical instruction looks like and use those on my feedback form. Is this kind of thing happening in the classroom, or is this happening effectively, that kind of thing. But I would find, I guess, in the way that we did it, we would find a way to get the feedback and let the feedback go to the instructor and try to have a good loop that way so that they were constantly trying to improve their class, but not just about any standards, about the ones that we were particularly trying to meet. But homeschoolers can disappear, like they can sign up for a class and leave halfway. It's not like when you're signing up for a school and they really have to think about it if they want to suddenly take their kids out mid-year or something like that. So our responsiveness to feedback loops on that was really important. We had an instructor once that was not Lutheran, and that did go not well. She was super capable. She could do both upper level sciences and upper level Spanish. And it didn't go well, just because even the expectations she set, she suddenly wasn't meeting them. So I spent a lot of time trying to help her listen to the parent feedback first, because it was more, this is your audience. You need to find a way to meet their needs, and you said you would do these things, and this is what's happening in class, and this is how this isn't matching. And so she did end up adapting and figuring some of that out eventually, but that, sometimes that happens, and trying not to let that impact your overall program, showing that you're being responsive to the feedback. And yeah.
I came in a little late. I missed your introduction, so I want to know where you are located. Were there a lot of Lutherans?
Okay, so I'm from Western New York, so it's not, there are definitely more heavily populated Lutheran areas in the United States. And most of the homeschoolers that I initially ran into were not Lutheran when we were starting. So if I was going to start a group of anything, it was going to serve more than Lutherans, because I don't know, I'm trying to think if when we started this, if I knew one other Lutheran family that was homeschooling at that time. So we started an outreach that it instantly appealed to Catholics who were already doing some classical programs, but also to some evangelicals, like the Latin teacher who came in. We've always had a percentage that were not Lutheran. I think it's more Lutheran now. Now we have a number of Lutheran families, and especially because we're supporting them, I think it's becoming a gathering point. But yeah, a good question. Is that?
Yeah, because I run a co-op right now, and I want to talk to you afterwards because I have 1,000 questions that aren't going to be probably interesting to anyone else. But we have about 97, I think, this coming year. And there's one Lutheran, which is me. So I'm concerned about, the faculty aren't Lutheran, the families are not. So
yes.
A lot of what you're saying is really speaking to my situation.
Yes, and those are the situations I've been in as well. Yeah, and you can end up with some really lovely things in some of these co-ops, but you're having to sift. Like I remember the one day my daughter was in a co-op, and one of the art teachers came to me super concerned because when they were talking about baptism in art class for some reason, and she came up and she's like, "Your daughter believes baptism saves her." I'm like, yep. So yeah, we've had some interesting, and sometimes there are no other options. Like you said, you're the only Lutheran around, and yeah. And so, but it was not long after that I was like, look, I want to do a program that, for one thing, even when we have people who are non-Lutheran, we are really gentle and respectful. One of my I was excited. I felt like we were meeting our goal when we had a pastor who was leading the upper level historical literature discussion from Omnibus. And they got to Revelation and talking about end times and everything. And I thought, oh, how is this going to go? Because there are like 2 Lutherans and at least a Catholic and, some other people from different backgrounds. Are we going to successfully host this conversation in a way that is respectful and able to actually talk about things? And so one of the boys came down, and he was such a great kid. And so I just said, oh, so how was class today? How did it go? And he said, I have such a better understanding of what Lutherans believe about the end times. He wasn't saying anybody was trying to coerce him. That was not it at all. He had a better understanding. And so they'd had a great discussion. Everybody felt respected. And he came out of it understanding more. I was like, so that's kind of how we've been able to handle, those kind of discussions. I think, being able to pull that off can be tricky, and yeah, I was excited. I felt like that was a real success story for us.
I wonder if you could speak to the question of cost. I mean, does your church do this as a ministry, or are teachers getting compensation, or are homeschoolers being charged a certain amount? Are they expected by their own curriculum?
Yes. Okay, yes. So yeah, cost was a huge factor. We came into a school that was already struggling financially, and we actually had some, an immediate perception that this was going to be a drain on the school, having them in there, So we, first of all, did some, math to try to make sure that what we were charging was well above what those kids were charging for the same amount of time in the school, well above. But our tuition was so low that was, unfortunately, at that point, not hard, like we were not charging a lot for the school, part of the issue. But so we always kept a goal that program would be self-sustaining. So the way we've run it has never been a ministry that the church has had to invest in, other than the fact that it's hosted on site. And so we actually, for most of the time that I did it, I volunteered my time, but continued to structure the classes with administrative costs built in, so that just kind of went back to the program and was a blessing for the program, or sometimes we'd do something for the church with that money instead. So it was another way that allowed volunteers to actually make even a positive financial impact. So generally, I think our impact has always been positive, either just in providing good instruction that covered its own costs, or sometimes either helped, like at one point I remember the school added another instructor, and we were half of the budget for him being added, so we were able to help them fund more instruction. Other times we have, we helped put in the security system when we needed to, up until then we just had regular doors, things like that. So we helped the school put in their secure doors with the buzzer and all that,
So kind of a follow-up to that, I mean, having come from a homeschool thing, but also being involved in the school, do you find in your area that homeschoolers are willing to pay for the value that these classes are? Because I know in our area that's not necessarily true.
I think it depends. Co-ops always sound better. I think some people are happier in co-ops. For us, because we're paying for the classes, because we're doing them the way we do, because we can have expectations on the students that are different, I think generally people have found it valuable. We still have always tried to price them as affordably as we can, but trying to maintain that balance that you have to pay well enough for people to stick around. And that's really a good point. As far as the financial structure of all of this, when you're asking a person to teach 1 or 2 classes a week, either they don't need a day job, or they have a super flexible day job to be able to do that for you. And so we have to pay them enough to keep them, or we have to keep them busy, so even in, the couple of days a week, like we have a music instructor who she teaches lessons and she does classes for us. So because of those, she actually spends the better part of 2 of her days of the week there. But if we weren't letting her do the lessons on site, she wouldn't be able to come and do the classes. There's no, it wouldn't be worth the costs for her to show up for 2 classes and lose half a day of doing something else. So So we've always tried to juggle that. We haven't had a set, everybody who teaches here gets paid a certain thing. We really try to work it out based on what they're doing, and some classes are valued more than others. But we've had people complain about interesting things too. Like we had some really affordable art classes, and then people would see the material fee, and the material fee was almost as much as the class. And so they would kind of get upset about the material fee, but it was like, but you can't just teach art without materials, you know. And so, you know, how you structure the pricing, trying to make it make sense. Is that helpful? Yeah, we tried to price the classes. I think we were aiming for like a 75% of what we took in would probably cover the cost of the instructor, and then 25% more administrative. But you know, that's gonna vary, and plus if you have other costs, you gotta factor those in. But we really did try to keep it realistic, even if there were volunteers teaching the class, so that, say a volunteer's teaching for a long time, but suddenly they can't, you can actually pay someone to do that job now. You know, trying not to sabotage things by keeping that big picture in mind.
Legal stuff.
Yeah.
You come from a heavily regulated state.
Yes.
I went from being right behind you all to they changed the law and you're much looser regulated, except for paid instruction. You have to be an accredited teacher.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
So there's no instruction, and if you're not an accredited teacher, you can only teach 4 students. So
Yeah, I think,
you work under a school. Our local Lutheran school is not willing to work with us.
and you can't even offer classes for homeschoolers for pay?
Not for pay, cannot.
Wow.
Last I heard that was still Iowa.
Iowa.
Yeah.
Wow.
So.
Yeah, we have some strange laws we have to work under too. New York, even now, we actually have a potential influx of new homeschooling students because they just passed a new law about vaccines. And so people really have now no option if they are against vaccines other than homeschooling. So that's going to be a whole nother factor. And it's made me think that even some of what we did in the past, you know, like, I don't know, like that would become a bigger issue. Also, our state says that you can't, what was that? It's a funny statement. You can't have instruction provided at a site other than the primary residence of the parents. Any instruction has to be in a building which has not been determined to be in violation of the local building code. So, yeah, like you don't know what kind of laws, like you're saying, are going to be on the books that might impact what you can and can't do, and you need to know that before you get started. Even as you go to pay instructors, making sure you're following labor laws, you know, are they independent contractors? Are they working for you? Like there are some seriously complicated things as soon as you leave the world of volunteer and go into some of those situations. So,
accountant, sorry to interrupt, a CPA who works with that, her name's Carol Top, and she works with homeschoolers, and she will, for about $80, give you a consultation, and she's walked us through several of those issues. We're actually converting to a 501c3 because of those issues, and that might be something that you can look into, but it is because we're in Virginia, and we're getting a bit more scrutiny than other parts of the country might, with regards to property tax exemption that church building we meet in is facing, because we were a for-profit under classical conversations, and we disbanded and became our own thing because of the issues related to that. And so, anyway, Carol Top is, her name is homeschoolcpa.com. That's her website. She's really good.
that's super helpful because we had trouble finding resources like that too, because things shifted over the time of our program as well. So that's a great resource. If you can give that to me at the end, if somebody does email me, I'll add that to the list of links. I think we're over time, well over. I'm so sorry. But I'd be happy to stay around for more questions if you'd like. Thank you so much for coming.